Welcome. They say a picture tells 1,000 words. Well then, we could rightly assume and say a collection of 185 pictures by women bring new meaning to Virginia Woolf's book, A Room of One's Own. A new exhibition, The New Woman Behind the Camera, on view July 2nd through October 3rd at the Metropolitan Museum of Arts on Fifth Avenue in New York City, brings meaningful, alternative, and contemporary visual essays that the famed feminist author would have rightly approved if alive today. The astutely and amazingly curated exhibition show images from the 1920s through the 50s, captured by 120 professional female photographers from 20 countries from around the world. Curated by Andrea Nelson, Associate Curator at the National Gallery of Arts in Washington, D.C., and Mian Feynman, Curator at the Met, the exhibition aims to change the narrative of modern photography by introducing viewers to the triumphant and groundbreaking work of these female professional photographers who until now have mostly remained unknown for their enormous contribution to the advancement of modern day photography and the fight for women emancipation. So talk to me about this exhibition. What inspired you to put it together, and how long, what story have you learned about this woman and the woman journey in the workforce?
Yeah. Well, I was very interested in exploring this increase of women photographers that was experienced after World War I. And we definitely saw more women photographers coming into the field, working in places like Germany, the United States. But I wanted to know, did that happen around the world? As women were pushing and pursuing more freedoms, demanding more access to the public sphere, more political rights, were there more women photographers, say, starting to work as professionals in places like Japan and China? And these were just the questions that I was asking myself. And then I started to do some research. And I think what's very interesting, as we can see on the wall here, someone like Margaret Brooke White was an incredibly successful photographer. She was actually really a celebrity, during the 1930s into the 1940s. One of her photographs was the cover of the first issue of Life magazine in 1936. And I think you can see how Margaret Brooke White is identifying herself as a photographer, right? She's standing really confidently. Her large format camera, right? That's a huge, large format camera on a tripod. It's as tall as her. She's showing how she can manipulate it, how skilled she is in holding her camera. She's wearing pants, and she's created an image of herself as a successful photographer, as a new woman, right? As a modern, independent woman. Now, Brooke White was really successful. Life magazine was circulating both nationally and internationally, and she became a model for other photographers like Sumeko Sasimoto, who first started working in photography in 1940. And so this is a portrait of Sasimoto right as she was starting to learn how to be a photographer. Through family connections, she was put in touch with the Japan Photo Library, and during her interview, she was asked if she would like to be a photographer like Margaret Brooke White. And she was ecstatic, and she said, yes, I want to. And that just started her career.
Yeah, can you talk about the South African one, these two photographs here?
So Constance Stewart Larrabee was born in England but raised in South Africa. Her father was connected to the mining business, and she studied photography in Germany, but came back to South Africa and opened her own photography studio, first in Pretoria, and then after the war, she opened a second studio in Johannesburg. She also was the only woman war photojournalist for South Africa during World War II. So she was traveling to France and covering the war for different magazines that were published in South Africa. And outside of her portrait studio, she also photographed a number of South Africa's different ethnic cultures. So including this woman, Sosha woman in South Africa. In looking at these works, Larrabee always took the stance as an artistic photographer. And she didn't really get involved in debates about documentary photography and ethnographic photography that others now have kind of thought about when looking at her works. But I think that they're very strong. The woman here is not looking at Larrabee. So
It's about beauty.
it's about beauty, right?
Yeah.
She's preparing herself, for a ritual, and is really kind of in her own thoughts,
Yeah.
right? And Larrabee's off to the side.
I mean, how rare is it to find something? I mean, for especially an African woman, a photographer. I mean, we have some now. It's still very few,
Yeah.
but back then, in 1947, I
Yeah.
mean, how rare.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and she's from a British family, but that is the question. I haven't found any indigenous African women photographers during this period. So that's where more research needs to be done.
I mean, the aspect of just recognizing, especially if you look at this picture, just
Yeah.
recognizing their beauty. I mean, right now we have more of that. We have
Right,
more.
exactly, yeah.
But I mean, I would say even 2-3 decades ago, more, the beauty of the black, dark-skinned person we not recognized. So to include this in this exhibition, it must have made an impression on you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, and there's actually another photograph by Larrabee that I think is in the social documentary section, and it's looking at a group of young people at a community center. They're dancing in Johannesburg right after the war.
So, I mean, given what is going on in our society right now, the issue of gender equality, the issue of pay parity, and because of the pandemic, we have women that are pulling out of the workforce. We also have in Hollywood, where whether it's Hollywood, is in New York, in every industry, women are often underpaid, often underestimated in their ability. So why do you think it is important for you to have this exhibition right now?
Well, I think it's important, for us to understand, the history of women, fighting for those types of rights, to have their own professions, to make their own life choices, and in some ways, it's been incredibly interesting to see, and a little frustrating about how little we have moved forward, right? So, I think it's always good to have a deeper understanding of the history of the struggles for emancipation and the struggles for greater rights, and it can help us perhaps think about ways to make improvements. And each one of these photographers has their own individual story. Cultural context really affected what they could do, what women could do, how easily it was for them to pick up a camera and to make money. So I think that helps us understand, not just history in the United States, but the history globally, of women and their efforts really to gain more agency. And I learned about so many different women, their lives, their approaches to being professionals. Some were supporting their families, as being professional photographers. A number of these women had very short careers. They were photographers, but then decided, that to stop being a photographer. Some got married, some had children, and they were dealing with these different pressures, both societal, cultural, and that led to, I think, them being overlooked, right, in the histories of photography. So, just understanding, right, all these different approaches.
So you are one of the curators, and what do you hope that people, when visitors come to the museum, what are you hoping for them to take from this exhibition? Why is it important?
Well, one thing that people will learn when they come here is that there were many women working with photography during this period. People might know of a few. They might have heard a few names. They might know Margaret Bourke-White, who was a photographer for Life magazine. They might know Dorothea Lange, who photographed, in the South for government agencies. But there were many women all around the world who were working with a camera. And so part of the exhibition is to just introduce people to these women photographers. But beyond that, we also want to change the narrative of modern photography, which previously has been really dominated by attention to male photographers. And we're trying to correct the record, to rewrite history, to include women and people of color who are working at the same time in the same field, and achieving things, making photographs that haven't been shown and haven't been recognized.
You mentioned to me earlier on when we were talking that there's an African American photographer from New Orleans. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Her name was Florestine Perot Collins. Her pictures, there's a portrait of her right over here. She had a studio in New Orleans from 1920 to 1949. And in order to get her training as a photographer, to learn the trade, she would sometimes work in other studios and chose to pass as white so that she could get studio jobs. Then when she was able to open her own studio, she catered primarily to Black and Creole clients in New Orleans. And this was really an opportunity for African Americans to present themselves in a dignified and gracious way, and to have photographs that would then memorialize their lives and their families. One of the things that was interesting, she was really kind of forgotten until her grandniece, who is a university professor, knew that her relative was a photographer, and so she went around to flea markets and collected her work, and had been dispersed, held by the families who had the photographs, and she brought it back together and did some research and wrote a book about this work, and so that's how it's come back into the history of photography.
Speaking of history, William Shakespeare wrote in Ulysses, "One touch of nature makes the whole world king." This past year experience with the COVID-19 pandemic, the global Black Lives Matter protest, The obvious socio-economic and health inequality that impregnates our societies have made us, the world, in many ways a lot wiser to want to create a beautiful and brighter future. Ethiopian American artist Julie Mehretu self-titled exhibit at the Whitney Museum in Lower Manhattan in New York City is a timely show that highlights various historical events from around the world, from Africa to the United States, juxtaposing intricately detailed black and white silhouette drawings of cities with starkly color images that contextualize the stark reality of history of modern day life and society. The show not only leaves viewer agape in wonder, it challenges viewer out of their comfort zone to see the world from new perspectives, reminding us that if only we could unveil the future, the present would be our greatest custody. These two exhibitions show, as Virginia Woolf once again noted in her essays, women have served all these centuries as looking glasses possessing the magic and delicious power of reflecting the figure of man at twice its original size. Anything may happen when womanhood has ceased to be a protected occupation. That's the end of our show. I am Kemi Oshukoya. Until next time, remember, stay open to new experience, get involved in your community, and encourage one another. I will see you again soon. And in the meantime, remember, subscribe to our show, and I will see you soon. Thank you.